Hello, fellow netizens, and welcome to Scandalous Games, the show where we take a closer look at video game-related controversies. I'm Kevin Impellizeri, and I'm joining you back here in the editor's chair. So this episode is the second half of the episode we started 2 weeks ago. You'll recall last time we started talking about Pokemon Prism and Pokemon Uranium, a pair of notable Pokemon-related fan projects that attracted a whole bunch of attention, including the attention of Nintendo. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things back over to myself, Andy Hunter, Kate Lynch, and Elford Stephens for the second part of this episode.
Experience the feeling of death as your Pokemon.
In any case, Pokemon Go got a whole bunch of people, both new and longtime players, back into the series. And with Pokemon Sun and Pokemon Moon coming out in November, along with all the other Pokemon-themed stuff going on in 2016 to commemorate the game's 20th anniversary, many people sought out any kind of media that helped them scratch that itch for more of that sweet, sweet Snorlax action. And in the midst of all this, Involuntary Twitch, JV, and their team put the finishing touches on Pokemon Uranium, releasing the 1.0 version of the game on August the 6th, 2016. The product of 9 years of work, the game's following exploded in 2016, and the prospect of a free, completely fan-developed adventure a full 3 months before Sun and Moon came out got a whole bunch of people excited. And aspiring Uranium players stormed the game's website. This almost immediately crashed their servers. And about an hour after the game dropped, the company hosting Uranium's website shut down their domain for up to 4 hours due to high traffic, prompting the developers to set up a couple of mirror download sites on other pages. And the ambitious Pokemon game 9 years in the making that anyone with a PC could download for free soon attracted the interest of the gaming press. And by August the 10th, Uranium received write-ups from the likes of Polygon, GameSpot, Kotaku, and IGN. I will also point out Kotaku did a write-up after the trailer dropped in 2014 as well. And IGN speculated that Uranium was possibly, quote, the most impressive unofficial Pokemon RPG ever made, end quote. And within a week, Pokemon Uranium had been downloaded over 1.5 million times. And unsurprisingly, Pokemon Uranium's breakaway popularity not only attracted the interest of Pokemon fans, gamers, and the mainstream video game press, there was another interested party that soon took notice of Involuntary Twitch and JV's fan game, Nintendo. However, before we examine how Nintendo responded to Uranium, let's shift back in on Pokemon Prism. Between 2009 and 2016, development on Prism was slow, to the point that even the most dedicated Prism fan would be forgiven for thinking Cool Boy Man had quietly abandoned the project. Cool Boy Man launched a development thread on Poke Community on July the 30th, 2010. However, his last posted update was on November the 25th, 2011. Updates on the game's website were also few and far between during the early 2010s, and after a post by Hiroshi on April the 1st, 2011, the site's blog went quiet for 5 years. All that changed on June the 29th, 2016, likely thanks in part to Twitch Plays Pokémon. Anyone here familiar with Twitch Plays Pokémon?
I know it by reputation, that it was like a Twitch channel that was just set up to play one of the original Pokemon games, but using, I guess, basically commenters would somehow, their comments would be converted into game inputs. Yeah, so it was kind of the game being played in aggregate or by consensus, or like, I don't know exactly how, if each comment just turned into its own input or if there was a voting system, but somehow it was being played via Twitch comment, I understand.
So yeah, Twitch Plays Pokémon, as the name suggests, was a Let's Play live stream of Pokémon hosted on the streaming site Twitch that debuted on the platform with a live stream of Pokémon Red that began on February the 12th, 2014. However, Twitch Plays Pokémon was no ordinary gaming live stream. The creator of Twitch Plays Pokémon developed the project as a social experiment with a compelling hook. Instead of one person playing through Pokemon Red while people watched and commented, Twitch Plays Pokémon relied exclusively on viewer participation. Initially, users chose from a list of commands, which they entered into the chat, and the game, through the use of a bot, input each command into the game in the order it was posted. The goal was to see how long it would take to reach the end credits based on this chaotic scenario of gameplay by committee. However, thanks to the overwhelming response from viewer players, this system quickly proved unmanageable and was replaced by 2 voting systems, which the player base could decide to implement at will. Anarchy mode, where the majority input after 30 seconds won out, and democracy mode, where the winning input needed a supermajority to be carried out in the game. And again, this is for every single action. Hit up, hit down, hit A, hit B. This is how they played this game.
So even like just stepping up by one tile,
Yeah,
you know, because you would have to input the up action 20 times to move, 20 feet forward.
yeah.
Wow.
That was this game. During the course of the Let's Play, Twitch Plays Pokémon attracted its own lore, complete with heroes and villains, including Lord Helix, the god of anarchy, and Flareon, the false prophet, as well as a power struggle wherein various factions of players vied for control of Red's adventure, including one group determined to work together to finish the game at all costs, while another set of trolls did everything they could to make that as difficult as possible. This included an infamous event known in the community as Bloody Sunday, where a bunch of trolls successfully managed to release 12 of Red's Pokémon. Nevertheless, despite all the chaotic struggles and infighting, the collective successfully became champion of the Pokémon League after 16 days, 7 hours, 45 minutes, and 30 seconds. Praise Helix. The adventure and the fascinating lore that developed around the project proved extremely compelling in the game community. According to Twitch, in a March 1st, 2014 post on the day of its completion, 1,165,140 users entered over 122 million commands, and the stream attracted over 9 million viewers with a peak viewership of around 121,000 people. So this was a pretty big deal for a little while. The live stream success inspired subsequent playthroughs of other Pokemon games, including mainline titles such as Crystal, Emerald, and Platinum, several randomizer runs where the Pokemon and battle encounters are randomized, and even some fan projects. And one of those fan projects was Pokemon Brown, which Twitch Plays Pokémon ran beginning on June the 16th, 2016, and the collective finished in just over 11 days. Several days after the stream, Coolboyman and Hiroshi announced that they were back to work on the Region Trilogy. They redesigned the game's website, launched a Discord for Prism, and announced that they had restarted development on Region Adventures, on top of promising readers that a whole bunch of exciting new things were in the works, concluding their post, quote, "It's gonna be a wild ride. Thanks for keeping it with us if you've been doing so since 2004. We've got so much more to deliver," end quote. A teaser trailer for Pokemon Prism launched on YouTube on October the 4th, 2016. The trailer showed off gameplay footage and boasted some of the game's features, including over 200 Pokemon, 20 gym battles, and 60 FPS gameplay, promising a full release in December. In over a month, the trailer attracted over 950,000 views. And so I'm going to show you that trailer. Here we go.
Oh, hey, there's a note here. This is a fan project, but please support the official releases. That's legal cover. I don't see how Nintendo could have any problem.
Airtight.
Creators of Pokemon Brown and Pokemon Anniversary Crystal.
Oh, it looks like it's on a Game Boy Color.
Yeah, it's a nice little throwback because it's built on Crystal, which is the Game Boy Color.
Pokemon Prism. New original story. Discover over 200 Pokemon. Explore the Daljo region. $20 badges to collect. Fully customize your trainer. Full 60 FPS gameplay.
That's something you want in your Game Boy game, is full 60 FPS game.
Play as your Pokemon.
Game whose file size is like the size of a Word document, you know?
Experience the feeling of death as your Pokemon.
Debuting on Twitch Plays Pokémon.
So yeah,
I'm not sure if it was just because of the way they did that video, but it looked like there may have been a lot of flexibility in how you made your character look.
it had a full customization system.
And is that something that the newer Pokemon games have?
Yes. Yeah, like
Okay.
Sword and Shield has a customization, but it took a long time to get that. It was kind of a big deal having it on a Game Boy game, you know? So
I mean,
yeah,
all kidding aside, that looks like a really cool game.
it does look pretty dope, doesn't it? So Twitch Plays Pokémon, meanwhile, hosted a playthrough of a build of Prism beginning October the 9th. And in case you're curious, it took people 16 days, 23 hours, and 18 minutes to complete the main game. Pokemon Prism seemed poised to reach its December the 25th, 2016 release, capping off Cool Boy Man's 8 years of development with an exciting Christmas present for the Pokemon faithful. But wait, what's that rustling in the tall grass? Oh no, a wild Nintendo appears! As with Pokemon Uranium, Pokemon Prism also attracted the attention of the Big N.
Yeah, I am kind of sad. Well, I'm not sad. So I am hoping that they start bringing these games out on the Switch. These are perfect games to like start getting into. I just need to dedicate time. I'm like literally just say this time during the week, we're just going to sit and play games together.
And they're fun. When I started researching, I picked up Silver again, and it's Game Boy Color game that came out, 20 years ago. I had a good time. It's fun to pick up those games. And it's just, I wish that Nintendo made it easier for people to experience those things, because they're basically telling people like the easiest way to get these things is piracy.
Well, and to a point you made in an earlier episode, it's not like there are legal ways to get at these games. Exactly.
Yeah. Think about like downloading music, like, the age of like Napster and like Kazaa and LimeWire and all those things. The way that the music industry ended up beating Napster was they eventually had like ways that people could access their media that were easier than piracy, that were more convenient than piracy. Like, who's going to go on in some sketchy website now and download a song when they can just go on Spotify, And I feel like that's a lesson that the game industry hasn't really picked up on. And Nintendo in particular hasn't picked up on that. And like, what's going to happen? It's like, if I can't play this on my Switch, I'd love to play Pokemon on my Switch. And there are tons of people who love to play Pokemon on their Switch, where like Nintendo's like, we'll decide when you get to play Pokemon on your Switch. And it's like, okay, then I guess I got to go buy it online. And like, if I went on eBay right now, I could probably find a copy of Pokemon Gold for $200 if I'm lucky. Or I could just go on some website and download a ROM of it. I'm not encouraging piracy here, but it's like Nintendo is basically putting you in a position where piracy is just so much easier than dealing with them. All right. Before we address Nintendo's response to Pokemon Uranium and Pokemon Prism, it's important to offer some context by taking a closer look at how video game companies responded when fans appropriate their IP into ROM hacks and or fan games. As we covered last time regarding the legality of fan projects, if someone or a group of people, fans or otherwise, are using IP or code or game elements that belong to another company, such as Nintendo, without some company's express permission, then technically they're violating their intellectual property rights and could face legal action. However, when it comes to the way video game companies respond to fan-developed projects that use their IP, there's really no one-size-fits-all approach, and the ways companies handle it will vary depending both on the company and the specific situation. And with that in mind, it's better to think of corporate responses to fan projects as a spectrum. On the one far end of the spectrum, you have exactly what you expect. Companies taking or threatening to take legal action. And these tend to fall into one of two categories: takedown strikes and cease and desist orders. In a takedown strike, also known as a copyright strike or a DMCA strike, the rights holder sends a notice to a company hosting copyrighted material without the intellectual property owner's permission, such as, like a website hosting company, an internet service provider, or a social media site. And the IP holder basically says, take this thing down under threat of criminal or civil penalties. And copyright holders can do this under a 1998 US law called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, or the DMCA. And other companies also have similar measures for removing potentially infringing material online that are comparable to the DMCA. So if someone gets a copyright strike, it's not necessarily DMCA, but it's kind of like a similar thing in other countries. In addition to takedown notices, an IP holder may send a cease and desist order directly to the fan project's creators. And this is an official legal notice sent to an individual or group that accuses them of specific kinds of wrongdoing. In the case of ROM hacks or fan games, things like copyright and trademark infringement. And basically says, if you don't stop doing what you're doing, we're going to pursue legal action against you. So like basically, I'm Nintendo, here to tell you that you making your Gardevoir dating sim violates my IP rights, and either you stop doing that or I'm going to sue you. And there are plenty of examples of companies taking this kind of action. For example, there's Chrono Resurrection, a fan game that was just too beautiful for this world. Has anyone heard of Chrono Resurrection?
No.
No, I'm guessing it's a fan successor to Chrono Trigger and or Cross.
So this was a project launched in April 2003 and led by a developer named Nathan Laser. Chrono Resurrection was an ambitious attempt to develop a full 3D remake of the legendary 1995 Super NES RPG Chrono Trigger. Between 2003 and 2004, the team dropped screenshots, some gameplay footage, and an absolutely gorgeous looking teaser trailer. However, Chrono Resurrection wasn't meant to be, as Square Enix sent out a cease and desist letter and the team closed up shop on September the 6th, 2004. Speaking of remaking the classics, there's also the case of Streets of Rage Remake, which, as we learned last time, was a fan-made remake / unofficial sequel of the dope as hell Sega Genesis beat-em-up series that released on April the 3rd, 2011. Several days later, Sega issued a takedown notice and developer Bomberlink pulled the file from his website, seemingly putting an end to over 8 years of work. I say seemingly because even if Bomberlink couldn't share it, by the time Sega stepped in, Streets of Rage Remake had been downloaded and reshared countless times, guaranteeing its digital immortality. Cut off one head and 1,000 others take its place. And to be fair, while takedown notices and cease and desist letters are fairly common, actual lawsuits are extremely rare, as 99 times out of 100 a fan project will comply because we've yet to see a ROM hacker who has the cash to go toe-to-toe with the likes of Activision Blizzard or Nintendo in a legal battle. Although, as I mentioned last time, it would be entertaining to see Elon Musk take some time away from being the most special boy on Twitter and battle Nintendo over the right to make a Fire Red ROM hack.
And or host an illegal upload of the Super Mario movie for several hours.
It was so funny when I heard about that.
I just watched it on TikTok while somebody live streamed it on their phone. Like a law-abiding citizen.
Meanwhile, on the other far end of the spectrum, some game companies outright encourage fan projects, either integrating them into the existing brand or hiring fan developers to work on mainline projects. And for a notable example of the former, I directed a Street Fighter Cross Mega Man, created by a Singapore-based developer named So Zhonghui, and apologies if I mispronounced that. Street Fighter Cross Mega Man was a fan game in the style of the NES Mega Man games, where instead of Dr. Wily's Robot Masters, the Blue Bomber took on characters from Street Fighter and could even gain new Street Fighter-inspired abilities after defeating them. So showed off an early build of the game to Capcom executive Kristen Svensson while they were attending the 2012 EVO, and EVO is a big fighting game convention and tournament. And Svensson was so impressed, Capcom officially released Street Fighter Cross Mega Man as a free download on December the 17th, 2012 to thank the fans and honor the 25th anniversaries of both franchises. But perhaps one of the most famous fan projects to become a mainline commercial product was Counter-Strike. Any Counter-Strike players here?
Not me, but my brother used to be super into it. So I've seen it played many times.
Neither me, but I'm familiar with it, watching it on YouTube. And I'm just not a shooter guy, but I've been familiar with it starting up its generation influence on the games.
I have just a very little amount of experience, mostly from playing with the source game engine.
Developed by Min Lee and Jess Cliff, Counter-Strike was a multiplayer mod of the original Half-Life that turned the amazing sci-fi FPS into a modern warfare-style military shooter that had players fighting as teams of either terrorist or counter-terrorist in multiplayer maps. The mod got so popular that Half-Life developer Valve hired the pair and released Counter-Strike as a commercial game on November the 14th, 2000. Another example of a fan project creator turned official developer was Christian Whitehead, who we briefly mentioned at the end of our last episode. And during the early 2000s, Whitehead, also known as the Taxman, started working on Retro Sonic, a Sonic the Hedgehog fan game developed in the style of the Genesis Sonic games. However, he abandoned the project after Sega not only didn't sue him, but hired him to develop official Sonic games, including the mobile versions of Sonic 1, Sonic 2, and Sonic CD, and the dope as hell Sonic Mania, all of which run on an engine derived from his original fan game. Has anybody played Sonic Mania? I find it a lot of fun. I think it's a good game.
Yeah, I love Sonic Mania. If you were a fan of Sonic in the 90s, it's the way you remember those games feeling. But, actually much nicer than actually going back and playing the old ones. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a great tribute it's very much in the spirit of those games. Even while not going this far, bringing on or adapting franchises from fan projects or hiring fan developers, some companies, especially in the PC gaming scene, offer players a ton of development tools, such as, level editors, to make it easier to create mods and other fan projects, likely reasoning that they promote both fan goodwill and ensure a steady stream of content that the company doesn't have to pay for. We talked about this, Phil brought this up last time about sharing clips for the NBA NBA versus the NFL online, that like it's an easy way to promote brand engagement and things, and might get more people into the actual mainline brands by showing all that stuff online. Some will even release an older game's source code and let technically or creatively inclined people in the fan community go nuts with it, usually on the condition that they don't use it to make a commercially competing product. For example, id Software released the source code for Doom 3 onto GitHub on November the 22nd, 2011.
Do they continue to maintain it, or is it like we're done?
My understanding is that they're not working on it anymore. They just put the source code out and let anybody work with it.
All right, cool. Yeah.
Other companies will encourage fan development so long as it's done within tightly controlled corporate mediated channels. And there are tons of examples of games that allow for user generated content. Some even host servers where players can share their work with other players. Think of like games like Minecraft, Roblox are examples of that.
Super Mario Maker.
Yeah, Super Mario Maker 2. However, video game companies will often make it clear that at the end of the day, they own any user-generated content, not the users who made it. For example, when I recently booted up Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin for the first time, under the game's end-user license agreement, I had to acknowledge that if I created any content in the game, I gave Bandai Namco Games America Inc., quote, an exclusive, perpetual, irrevocable, royalty-free, fully transferable, and sub-licensable worldwide right and license to use my content in any way and for any purpose in connection with the game and related goods and services, including the rights to reproduce, copy, adapt, modify, perform, create derivative works from, display, publish, broadcast, transmit, or otherwise use, distribute, exploit, and communicate to the public by any and all means and media, whether now known or hereafter devised, without any further notice or compensation of any kind to me for the whole duration of protection granted intellectual property rights by applicable laws and international conventions, end quote. Well, I guess I'll keep my Emerald Herald fan art to myself, I guess.
So, Kevin, did you actually read this stuff like when you were playing the game? I had no idea it said any of this.
I did read the license agreement this time, just on a larf, and I noticed that it had this whole thing about fan-generated content. And I imagine that there are lots of games that have similar things to that. I think FromSoft is a great example of a company where like there are tons of like user-generated stuff. Like I've seen like fan-developed like challenges. There's like ones where like it's Dark Souls, but all of the enemies are Ornstein and Smo, for example. Or like there's one on Elden Ring. I just saw the guy who did Let Me Solo Her, the guy who basically beat Melania for people by themselves. He just completed a mod of Elden Ring where all the enemies were Melania.
So I'm wondering, just to keep going down this rabbit hole, if this has ever been tested in court. Because, how many hundreds of hours have I played Dark Souls? And I had no idea it said any of this stuff. Nor have I actually signed anything, right? I did purchase the game, right? So I know you're not an expert on this, but like I purchased the game, which should mean I have a right to play the game, right? Does my having to click past this in order to play the product that I purchased entitle someone else to make me swear allegiance to something? It's interesting just thinking about that.
I'll just chime in. And in terms of something like waivers or click-through agreements, things that you sign, like for instance, if you sign this thing that says I get to do whatever I want, you've pledged allegiance, you pledged your soul to me forever, and I get to do whatever I want. In terms of how it holds up in court, what you have at the end of the day is a piece of paper. There's any number of ways, depending on who's on your side, and what you're trying to do, theoretically, that you can be reasonable about, like, oh, I didn't understand what I was signing. Or I was, the language is not clear, or I was under duress, or something like that. And that's not manipulative. It's more manipulative to say, whatever, you hit the button and now I get to do whatever I want.
Yeah.
Interesting.
At the end of the day, who's got the money to go to court with Bandai Namco?
Well, and again, that's something we talked about last time, too, is like, is it worth it to go after the person making what kind of fan art did you say you were making, Kevin? And why haven't I seen it yet?
The Emerald Herald, who is a character.
Right,
she's a character in Dark Souls 2.
Okay, so if you're making your erotic Emerald Herald fan art and...
Who said anything about erotic?
I was just assuming.
That's fair. Fair play.
Yeah, that's fine. But like, yeah, if you're doing that and you're just like doing that for yourself, that's fine. But if you're printing up t-shirts and selling 1 million of them, then maybe I go after you.
Yeah. And again, there's not a lot of incentive for one, to answer your question, Alfred, as far as I know, this has never been challenged in the courts. If people want to prove me wrong, scandalousgamespodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to hear it. But for the most part, I think that one thing that Bandai Namco, the people who own FromSoft, who own the rights to Dark Souls, that I think that there's a lot more incentive for them to not do anything because it promotes so much engagement and brand conversation. Like, think about like the way I found out about that let me solo her run of every enemy in Elden Ring is Melania is it got picked up by the gaming press. And so like this is a way of, I think, encouraging excitement in a game that keeps people thinking about it. And like I think ultimately for a company like FromSoft, they probably see it as a boom because it keeps the game out there and it keeps people excited about it and it keeps the game fresh and it keeps people coming back to it. And so there's lots of reasons why they wouldn't want to challenge that in the courts because it promotes such goodwill. On a related note, video game companies are also not above financially capitalizing on their fans' various love letters to their intellectual property. For example, in 2015, Bethesda and Valve announced a system wherein modders could charge for their Skyrim mods available through Steam, provided that Valve and Bethesda received a 25 and 45% cut, respectively, on every sale. Only for Bethesda to abandon the idea following player backlash, and then just roll out another version of it with the Creation Club 2 years later.
Now, I've only ever played Skyrim on Switch, but I can very easily imagine a world in which a modded version of Skyrim runs much better than the actual product that Bethesda has sold to you. So it's funny that they would be like, all right, yes, we will sell you, this janky game, and then we'll let modders fix it. And the modder will get to keep 35% of the profits from their work, and will then get to keep most of it.
Yeah, Bethesda not well known for releasing polished games. We'll put it that way. Valve, meanwhile, offers some mods for their games for sale on Steam, and they take a 30% cut on every purchase. Also, the decision whether to allow a fan project to continue is totally contingent on the IP owners. For example, it's a common practice among certain fan projects, especially the most ambitious ones, to reach out to the game's IP holders in hopes of at least receiving a tacit endorsement. For example, there's Installation 01, a multiplayer-only Halo fan game currently in development by Soon Studios. In 2017, Soon reached an agreement with Microsoft and 343 Industries, that's Halo's IP owner and their current developer respectively, allowing Installation 01's development to progress under Microsoft's game content usage rules under the condition that it remained a non-profit enterprise, that they're not developing a competing product. But Microsoft for right now is letting them do this. And this kind of agreement is always subject to the whims of the IP holder. Microsoft ultimately holds the final say over whether Installation 01 will come out with their blessing or be shut down with a takedown notice or legal threat. For example, any King's Quest fans? Yeah, I knew you'd raise your hand, Kate.
Yes.
In 2000, a group called Phoenix Online Studios started work on an unofficial sequel to the King's Quest series, originally titled King's Quest IX. On December the 30th, 2005, the team received a cease and desist order from Vivendi Universal Games, who held the rights to the King's Quest series. However, the two parties reached an agreement to allow Phoenix Online Studios to continue development, renaming the game The Silver Lining. However, after Activision acquired Vivendi, the new owners of the King's Quest IP sent another cease and desist order against The Silver Lining in 2010, thus shutting the project down. So this is an example of like, they got a cease and desist, they reached a deal to make it, another company came and bought those rights, and they sent a cease and desist. In between those two extremes, issuing legal challenges and encouraging, if not outright embracing fan projects, lies the most common scenario facing the vast majority of people making unauthorized content based on a video game IP. No reaction whatsoever. Again, I'm putting this out there that we're not endorsing any of this stuff, but we're just based on the history of these kinds of projects. Most fan projects won't see any kind of corporate response one way or another. And as we covered last time, sometimes that's in the best interest of the companies, as fan development is a cheap and easy way to promote an existing game's brand. So again, while not an endorsement, there's a really good chance that as long as a project doesn't get too big or run the risk of directly competing with the original developers, then chances are you'll face no challenge for your version of Doom, where instead of murdering, the goal is to hug everyone on Mars. All of this again is to say that the way video game companies respond to fan projects is context specific and depends on the project. However, it's worth noting that when it comes to the way companies respond to unauthorized uses of their IP, Nintendo is in a class of its own. And we'll learn about that and how the company responded to Pokemon Prism and Pokemon Uranium, as well as a couple other notable projects next time. But for now, final thoughts.
So, not the most sophisticated thoughts, but this morning my daughter was playing a game, and that game was they were making cookies using this glitter sparkle. and she asked me to be the judge of the cookie making. And her first or second cookie I had to judge, I came in, and instead of trying to say this one's better than this one, I described what the cookies looked like. And this cookie, I said, it looked like if one of my neighbor's dogs had come and left a pile of mess on the front lawn, right? And so when you introduced Pokemon Brown, the childish side of my mind remembered at my job, there's something called a code brown. And a code brown is when someone has left their feces on the bed, right? And I'll call it code brown, which means we have to come clean up. And I thought, Pokemon Brown, what if instead of Pokemon, the regular Pokemon, they took the same Pokemon and all the little Pokemons were little poos that are shaped like the Pokemons.
Wait, so would it be called Pookemon?
It's like Conker's Bad Fur Day, but Pokemon.
Pikachu.
Togepi.
I think my final thoughts are, unlike Kevin, I am never shy about offering official legal advice. Even though I have not really partaken in video game piracy, I endorse everyone to do what their heart says, especially if you know a way for me to play AM2R on my Switch. But yeah, it's just once again, it's interesting how it is pretty impressive, just the amount of effort that people put into these games, and it's nice when they are able in one form or another to be able to put their work out for other fans to enjoy.
Yeah, I kind of, my final thoughts are kind of similar there, where basically, what are you trying to do by not allowing people to gain access to these games? I mean, what are the people who are making these games trying to do? I've yet to see one of them who's trying to put someone out of business or take business away from somebody who's making money off of this. It's really more like, you're not going to do this, and I really want this, and so does the community, and so we're going to put it out there. Or even if it's just like, I really want to do this. And that if a big company came out and did this themselves, like, great, then I'll buy that and I'll play the game that I made. It just seems to be very short-sighted and kind of alienate folks from their own fan base to punish people for doing this work. It's a labor of love all around.
Just jumping in on final thoughts again, in terms of modding in general and people doing things at home, this is one of the things that for video games has been, like, for the last 25 years for me, has been like one of the highlights of it as an art form and as an entertainment form versus other things. And these battles are really important because maybe some good ideas like Pokemon were initially captured and then supported by a large corporation. People at home still do things with their programming that move gaming forward. And so this conversation is extremely important because how much, these things have affected gaming in general and bringing new ideas into games that still exist, that these corporations will adapt to.
Yeah, I mean, Elford, you mentioned in the preview for the other game that we watched that people could customize their trainer. And it was like, is this now a thing we can do in the game? Apparently so. And that made me think, like, did they start to do this because people responded so favorably to the ability to do this in that fan game? Like, clearly, this is basically UX testing for free for these companies to make what fans want, and also, to your point, kind of move the medium forward.
I think what's really neat about this culture is also, like, there's a long history of people wanting to have agency over the media they consume. Like, this is where I get the nerdy academic side note in here. There's a media scholar named Henry Jenkins put out a book in 1992 called Textual Poachers. And he introduced this idea called participatory culture, that there's this consumable media. And he talks a lot about, like, television, soap operas, short-running shows, long-running shows, and shows like, I think he mentioned Star Trek. He mentions the Beauty and the Beast series that George R.R. Martin did in the 1980s with Ron Perlman, and, like, how people watch these things, but they're not just receiving these media, but they're also, like, interacting with it. So, like, for example, like, creating their own fan media and creating things like fan fiction has a long history in popular media, and, like, the development of, like, like slash fiction and things like that, because Kirk and Spock slash fiction was kind of one of the foundations of participatory culture, and this idea of people taking things that other people have created and iterating and developing their own spin on it, and this being both very engaging and, like, ways of reshaping media, and also, like, like ways of even telling new and different stories that have otherwise been like, you know, sidelined or marginalized. So like for marginalized communities, like it creating a way that they can have themselves in media that they're largely excluded from. Like it's a really neat, really interesting, engaging history of that. And video games are so much about, let's be real. The video game industry has built a lot of itself on the foundation of the users doing a lot of the work for them, engaging with the media, creating games, creating content, sharing stuff on YouTube, all of those things. And I think that on a certain level, the mainstream games industry is built on a level of, and on top of that, like the fact that there are so many people who get into gaming who came through the modding scene and came through the fan gaming scene. Like think of guys like talking about like John Carmack developing that fan game of Super Mario Brothers 3, Dangerous Dave, and copyright infringement as a way of showing that like we could do these things on a PC, and like that these kinds of avenues do create opportunities to, you know, expand the brand of a game, of an intellectual property, and kind of test it in different weird and interesting ways. And for some companies that creates like, well, this is great brand engagement. We don't have to do anything. It's free and easy. But for others, it kind of tests the boundaries of where their brands are. And this is where Nintendo comes in, because Nintendo is extremely protective of their intellectual property. And they've been this way for a long time. This idea of like, we have a very specific message when it comes to our media. We talked about this when we talked about the development of the ESRB, that Nintendo wants to make sure that you know that they are family friendly, they're for all ages, and we will take you to court.
And I'm just curious, is there an impetus for that? Like, was there something that happened that made them think they got to lock this down?
I don't know. My first instinct was that this was a cultural thing because, you know, Nintendo, a Japanese company, but there are other Japanese companies that don't act this way. For lack of a better term, Nintendo is kind of does their own thing. They've kind of always done their own thing in the games industry. And the thing that they do in particular is being very, very protective of their media. Why they do it is probably something I need to do more research into, but you can definitely see the evidence, and we're going to see that next time, about the lengths that they will go to make sure that people know that Nintendo, at the end of the day, they're going to assert this control. Whether or not they have full control about that, that's a whole other thing, because the internet is the internet, but that they want people to make sure that people know that at the end of the day, Nintendo gets the say on these things. And Nintendo holds their media with an iron hand. They're never going to have a whole 100% control, but they want to make sure people know who's the big dog. And we'll talk more about that next time. But for now, that will do it for today's episode of Scandalous Games. If you like what we're doing and want to help the show, subscribe or follow us wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a rating. If you want to learn more, check out our website, scandalousgamespodcast.wordpress.com, where I publish the show notes and the sources for every episode. Our theme music is Occam Seek Me by Seek Knowledge via the Free Music Archive, used under a CC BY NCSA 3.0 US license. If you have a question, comment, or idea for a topic for a future episode, email us at scandalousgamespodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, I'm Kevin Impellizeri.
I'm Andy Hunter.
I'm Elford Stephens.
I'm Kate.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next Scandal. Subscribe to Fat Roll Gaming on YouTube.